Hey gang, we are at St. Columba Cemetery in Ottawa, Illinois, pretty far west of Chicago, and I have been looking for pretty much about a week to find this grave. And it just goes to show you, you can't find a grave all the time. Usually it's pretty good, but the person who did the entry for the Rooney family just put it flat out in the wrong city, it's around here. And this is probably the 7th cemetery, but we found it. I had some help. Of course, Deb, our ancestry helper, helped a lot on this whole episode, and we traced it here. This is where we shot the episode of the Radium Girls. I'll put that link in. And also we had, the person that suggested this story, one of our viewers, Star Spangled, thank you, and Ryan, who works the cemeteries around here. I think he's at Oak Hill. I think that's in LaSalle, Peru. But anyway, Ryan, thank you so much. He put flags on it, and we found it. Now, this is a legendary story of spontaneous combustion, and in many cases, like the case we saw in Pennsylvania, I think that woman was smoking and fell asleep. It's always kind of this type of a situation where this couple, they became inebriated, and I'll tell you the story. Let's go for a walk. Beautiful old cemetery. We've been here before, but we really haven't taken any kind of look at this section here, way in the back. And of course, when you get to the back of cemeteries, it's usually the older part. But yeah, this is such a weird and creepy story. And again, if I said it before, if you're like me, spontaneous combustion, you think somebody went poof and they just magically disappeared, but it's really not that case. These are cases where people kind of slowly burn to death, and most of the times they're unconscious as this horrible effect transpires. And I'll tell you a little bit how it works. So yeah, let's walk to the grave. But it was in the 1800s, late at night on Christmas Eve, 1885, in a little town called Seneca, which is pretty close to here. I checked the cemeteries there. There's I think it's called Calvary there. And it was Christmas Eve, 1885, and they're there, and there's a woman named Mary Rooney. Now, let me just start out by saying that if you look online and you see this story, it's Matilda Rooney. And then, of course, when these blogs, they all start telling the story, they all start just copying the other blog or the other, these historians, and they get the story wrong. Hopefully we can set a lot of this straight today. But it is not Matilda, it's Mary. Of course, we've verified this by the monument. So, Mary's alone in the kitchen. And the short story of it, and we'll get more into it, is basically a fire incinerated her body. Her husband, Patrick, was found dead from asphyxiation in the bedroom. Now, the bedroom was right next door to the kitchen there. And they were found by a guy named John Larson, who was their hired hand. He was living there, and their son, John Rooney. Now, ironically, John was in the house, the hired hand, and he was sleeping upstairs. And luckily for him, he had his door closed. Probably the reason he survived, although he suffered greatly. Smoke goes up, so he caught a lot of it. And he is actually the one, along with their son, like I was saying, John found them. Now, the last time that the two of them, Patrick and Mary, were seen together was at 8 p.m. the evening before, Christmas Eve. They were having drinks, actually with Larson and their son, and it is said they were drinking from a jug of whiskey. Can you imagine that? Now, the body of Mr. Rooney, Patrick, was found lying next to his bed, and the more detail of the story is that in the kitchen there was a partly burned candle which was standing on the table, and next to that was a hole burned through the floor measuring 2.5 feet by 3 feet, through which you could look down and you could see the ground. It was like the crawl space below. And down in that hole there was a heap of ashes, and that was all that was left of Mary Rooney. Well, there was a skull, there was a cervical bone, there was a vertebrae and some other bone fragments, but all were basically reduced to a cinder. And most horrifying is that her shoes were there, and inside her shoes were her feet. And her feet were only charred. Now, Mrs. Rooney weighed about 160 pounds, they say, and she was reduced to about 12 pounds of material when this was all over. Nothing else in the kitchen was damaged by the fire, but most of the house's interior walls and furniture were coated with a dirty, greasy, sooty substance. Now, isn't that something that sounds very familiar from our story in Pennsylvania of Helen Conway? It's basically the same kind of thing. And imagine breathing that in, this Larson guy. So it hadn't spread to the house. It started on her body, and it stayed mostly confined to her body, of course, on the floor. She melted, burned right down through the floor. Now, there was an investigation, police and coroner, and they led to this conclusion that Mary died of the victim of spontaneous human combustion. And there was a newspaper article, the Evening Gazette, December 28, 1885, and it was there that it was stated that she was winding the clock, and it was the candle that I'd mentioned that set her clothes on fire. Now, how they would know that, I don't know, but you know the newspapers. And of course, Patrick was asphyxiated by those fumes. And they were, this is while they're sleeping off the drinks, right? Passed out. They initially thought Jarn Larson maybe had murdered them. They thought, how could this happen? But they checked his pillow, and there was an outline of his head on the pillow. And they're like, well, I guess he was sleeping the whole time. I mean, how could there be an outline of his head? And I guess he was really cleared because I think it was 2 weeks later he died. So there's the proof. He did not murder the Rooneys. It was said in the paper, quote unquote, the Rooneys were addicted to the excessive use of whiskey. There was the then current belief about these kind of people that when you're loaded up with the whiskey that you would die of spontaneous combustions, quote unquote, affecting drunkards. Now, of course, Mr. Rooney would not combusted, but the effect of the drinks basically rendered him useless, inebriated, passed out. Now, interestingly, in the 20th century, scientists have done some research into this, and they call it the wick effect. Clothing worn by a victim that is slowly burning can meld with their outer skin, and then the body fat, acting like a wick, and a candle creating conditions for the body to smolder for many hours. You know, it's just like it's just like the seals or the whales, you know, the old whaling ships going after the whales, and the blubber and the oil for the lamps, right? And all the oil, it burns slowly. I think the Inuit used, of course, they would use the blubber for oil to light the wicks. So it's the same kind of thing. I mean, you've seen the movie Moby Dick, right? Captain Ahab. So yeah, that's basically what happened. You're unconscious, you're sitting there, and you're like melting like a candle yourself from your body fat. They did experiments on it, and it produced those effects. Alcohol does not make the body more flammable, though, as much as people thought that. It is really that you're passed out and remaining motionless as a candle does. Just a truly horrible story to even think about. Well, we're at the monument here. It's just up ahead. The monument that I'd been looking for days here, and here it is right out in the open at Columba Cemetery, St. Columba Cemetery in Ottawa, Illinois. And there it is. Beautiful monument. I think this was done more recently because there is one stone that's in the ground here that we can see. And I believe this is of the sun, it looks like. Yeah. In memory of, looks like Michael Rooney, and it looks like 1869 age. Let's see here. I think his name's on the big stone. Yeah. Looks like April or something 28 years. So it's 1869 when he passed. Now let's take a look. Yeah, this is Michael Rooney right here. I don't have my flashlight, hopefully that shows up, but it says Michael Rooney died November 27th, 1869. He was 28 years old. And then we have Thomas, son of J and M Rooney, age 2 years, 6 months. And here is the inscriptions for the Rooneys who we're talking about. Patrick Rooney died December 25th, 1885, Christmas Day. He was 73 years old. There's Mary, wife of Patrick, and she died February 6, 1852. Now, how interesting is that? She was only 36 years old. Oh, that's not the Mary we're looking for. The Mary we're looking for died on Christmas Day, right? So we look over here, and voila. There is a Mary Rooney. This is true. Wife of Patrick Rooney died December 25th, 1885. There she was 66 years old. So there it is, guys. Beautiful monument. Look at this. The vase on top. I should say an urn. And this is granite. Now, granite lasts pretty much forever. But I tell you, this looks, somebody must have, maybe descendants shelled out the money for this. That's a beautiful new stone. I will bet that in the original day, there were stones like this for all of them. And of course, they were standing up. So, well, I did bring a rose for Mary, and I guess we'll just place it on the ground here. There. Well, that's the story, guys. That is the story. I guess I just have one question. One curiosity is, what's buried here? Well, we know Patrick's here, but what is left of Mary? Her 2 feet, 2 shoes. Is there a little coffin down there of just 2 feet and 2 shoes and some bones? I guess so. I guess so. Well, rest in peace to the ROONEY'S. A story of spontaneous combustion.